Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in his submitted remarks, Mr. Duss notes that arguments by the BDS should be addressed in the American tradition with thoughtful, considered, and ethical counter-arguments. I would like to note for the record that Mr. Duss's father has accused Israel of war crimes and claimed that modern Israelis are not descended from biblical Jews. I would also like to note for the record that Mr. Duss's brother is infamous for his tweet, and I quote, "Why are so many Israeli politicians rapists?" End quote. I would also like to note that Mr. Duss's work with the Center for American Progress reacted in the height of offensive anti-Semitic rhetoric when he had attempted to build his views with Nazi-era posters on their Think Progress website. This drew an extremely rare rebuke of the Center for American Progress writers from the White House, a very rare thing indeed, that these views and tactics were troubling. In fact, this rebuke also further notes that the Simon Wiesenthal Center, the Anti-Defamation League, and the American Jewish Committee have all termed the anti-Israeli rhetoric of a Mr. Gilani and fellow Center for American Progress writers Eli Clifton, Ali Garib, Matt Duss, and Ben Armbruster to be infected with Jew hatred and discriminatory policy positions toward Israel. And so my question would be, Mr. Dubowitz, do you think that these types of arguments that are coming from this key witness that has been elevated to testify before Congress, are these thoughtful, considered, and ethical ways to approach the issue? Yes or no?
So, Congressman, I think that it's absolutely critical to examine the backgrounds and the writings and the research of people who appear before your subcommittee.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Birnbaum, do you believe such tactics to be thoughtful, considered, and ethical counter-arguments?
No. And I'd take it one step further, and I'd like to correct, for the record, something that Mr. Duss said. Now, I'm not an international scholar, and I'm not a lawyer, but Mr. Duss said that the BDS does not have a position on the two-state solution, and they do. I do know how to read, and I'm reading some quotes from Mr. Omar Barghouti, the co-chair of the BDS, and he said, "Good riddance, the two-state solution for the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is finally dead, but someone has to issue an official death certificate before the rotting corpse is given a proper burial and we can all move on." And there are many other such quotes.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Kantorovich, do you believe that these are thoughtful, considered, and ethical approaches for argument?
Well, there's a contradiction in this perspective. Mr. Duss, on one hand, claims that we should have discussions and arguments about BDS rather than having legislation. On the other hand, he acknowledges that Israel has much-deserved protections against boycotts in the form of the anti-Arab boycott, anti-Arab League boycott laws, etc. That demonstrates that the American tradition is not simply to discuss trade and strategic problems, but to take action about them.
And thank you, sir. And so, Mr. Chairman, I am somewhat troubled that we have before us today someone elevated to come and testify before Congress that might have such a closet to be examined. And I find that these types of approaches to the BDS problem to be unthoughtful, ill-considered, and of questionable tactics. And as a result, I really don't want to hear any more that he might have to say in this hearing. Thank you, and I yield back my time.